Ukraine's reconstruction at the very successful recovery conference that the UK hosted the other week. We're doing our part as well, Mr. Speaker, with a $3 billion World Bank loan guarantee on top of all the other investment that we've put in place. And I think what the conference showed is that there's enormous momentum across the world to support Ukraine's recovery, and that recovery and ambition is being led by the United Kingdom.
Janet David.
Mr. Speaker, a university student in Lewisham East has seen her rent rise by £200 a month due to the mortgage rate increases. She is now at risk of homelessness and she can't return to the family home. She has no choice but to use food banks, even though she has 2 part-time jobs. Not only is she falling behind in her studies, she's falling further into debt and she's falling into depression. What does the Prime Minister say to constituents like mine who are paying the dual price of this government's cost of living crisis and mortgage rates crisis?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've taken significant action to help families across the country, most notably by taxing the windfall profits of energy companies and using that money to pay around half of a typical family, including all of her constituents' energy bills. That support is worth £1,500, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased that energy bills are forecast to fall £430 when the price cap resets in a couple of days. But beyond that, there's considerable support for the most vulnerable in our society, including £900 of cost of living payments for those on universal credit and additional support for pensioners and indeed disabled people, Mr. Speaker, and that's what we'll continue to do.
Bailey.
Speaker, we are heading into the 5th week of Sandwell Labour's refuse strikes. We've had flying pickets, we've had reports of the GMB blocking ambulance workers getting out of their depot as a result of their picket lines, and the PCC trying to encourage the police not to police it. Can I ask my right honourable friend to ensure that he convenes a meeting urgently so we can resolve this, and perhaps he'll join me and tell Labour politicians, particularly one in particular, grow a spine and put people before your paymasters.
We've done very well, don't spoil it now, Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable friend put it very well, but illustrated exactly the issue. Because, Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party is unable to stand up to its union paymasters and back our plans to introduce minimum service and safety levels in critical industries. That's a type of practical action that supports working families. It's one that the Labour Party isn't strong enough to actually support.
Welcome back, Donald.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. After events in Russia at the weekend, it is unclear what the future holds for the Wagner Group. But what can never be washed away is the catalogue of crimes they've committed across Africa, the Middle East and, of course, in Ukraine. But despite all of that, Mr. Speaker, the government doesn't yet have a permanent Cabinet Office official to coordinate all of the organs of government to pursue the criminals in the Wagner Group. Will he appoint one? And crucially, will he fund collecting evidence of Wagner Group war crimes that have been committed across the world so that these criminals, no matter what happens, can be brought to justice in future?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have consistently condemned the Wagner Group and we carefully monitor their actions in Ukraine and the wider world, as the Honourable gentleman mentions. We have designated both the Wagner Group and its leader under our sanctions regime already, and we also support international mechanisms which hold individual mercenaries in the Wagner Group to account for violations of international law. But I also reassure him that we are working very closely with our partners to counter the malign use of such proxies by Russia and more generally across the continent.
Paul Brister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday night, an illegal traveller encampment was established on Bretton Park. On Saturday, the much-loved Bretton Festival is due to take place on Bretton Park. This House passed legislation that gives more powers to police to tackle these illegal encampments. Will the Prime Minister make it clear today from the dispatch box that he expects police to use those powers on these encampments that blight public spaces and public parks in places like Peterborough?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we absolutely recognise the misery that unauthorised encampments can cause to local communities. And that's why we've delivered on our manifesto commitment to give police the powers they need to tackle those people on unauthorised encampments who are causing harm. Now, of course, how the police use these powers is an operational matter for chief constables, but we wouldn't have legislated for them if we didn't expect them to use them, Mr. Speaker. And I am told that Home Office officials are liaising regularly with the National Police Chiefs Council on this exact matter.
Final question, Martin Docker to use.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the past couple of days, yet again, we have been reminded that a member of the other House was appointed contrary to the recommendations of MI5. And in the Channel 4 film, that even the monarch was actually asked to be involved because Whitehall officials were so opposed, given that they were deemed a security risk to the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So can I ask the Prime Minister, does he agree with MI5 or with his predecessor that that peer should still be in the other House?
Prime Minister.
If Mr. Speaker, for obvious reasons, I'll talk in more general terms. With the House of Lords Appointment Commission vets crossbench and party political life peerage nominations to the House of Lords, and where appropriate, seeks advice from government departments and agencies. And were a Prime Minister to recommend a peerage against the Commission's formal advice, the House of Lords Appointment Commission has previously undertaken that it would write publicly to the relevant Parliamentary Select Committee.
Completes Prime Minister's questions. Right, let us come to the urgent question. If people can stop the conversation in the middle, will be helpful, Mr. Slaughter. Right, we come to the urgent question. Jim McMahon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs to make a statement on the financial resilience of the water industry.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Water is what makes life possible on our planet, and it is essential for our health and well-being, as well as our economy, including the production of food and clean energy. The government is taking significant steps to ensure the water industry is delivering the outcomes bill payers expect and deserve. Water companies have invested £190 billion since privatisation in 1989. In April, the government published the Plan for Water, bringing together more investment, stronger regulation and tougher enforcement capacity for regulators and on those who pollute. Ofwat and the government take the financial resilience of the water sector very seriously. Ofwat are the independent economic regulator for the water sector, including responsibility for the financial resilience of the water sector. The sector as a whole is financially resilient. Ofwat continues to monitor the financial position of all the key water and wastewater companies. Ofwat reports annually on the sector's financial resilience, and Ofwat's latest annual Monitoring Financial Resilience report shows that the water sector is financially resilient. Market confidence in the sector is also demonstrated by new acquisitions, such as Pennon's purchase of Bristol Water, and by shareholders being willing to inject new capital. Ofwat has taken steps in recent years to strengthen the sector's position. This includes action to update the ring-fencing provisions in water company licences to better safeguard the interests of customers, and barring water companies from making payouts to shareholders and removing money or assets from the business if they lose their investment credit grade rating. Ofwat has outlined that water companies must be transparent about how executive pay and dividends align to delivery of services to customers, including environmental performance. And since privatisation, total capital investment has outstripped dividends by 250%. On the 20th of March 2023, Ofwat announced new powers that will enable it to take enforcement action against water companies that do not link dividend payments to performance for both customers and the environment. And in December 2022, Ofwat strengthens its powers on executive pay awards by setting out that shareholders and not customers will fund pay awards where companies do not demonstrate their decisions or pay awards reflect overall performance. We support Ofwat's work and we urge all water companies to take this opportunity to review their policies. The scale of government commitment for the water industry is highlighted by the Integrated Plan for Water and our commitments to the financial resilience of the sector in delivering for customers and the environment.
Thank you. Jim McMahon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, can I thank you for granting this urgent question, but I have to say, again, it's a concern that the Secretary of State didn't proactively make a statement to the House on an issue of such importance. And I just say, where is the Secretary of State? Literally, one of the largest water companies in Britain potentially is going to go to the wall, and the Secretary of State is missing in action. And it was clear to anyone looking on that a culture that allowed vital investment in ending the sewage scandal and in tackling water leaks sacrificed in favour of a gold rush for shareholders just was never sustainable. Now, just last year, as raw human sewage was being pumped out across the country, £1.4 billion was paid out to shareholders. And now all that was warned is coming to pass. Leaks are leading to water shortages, sewage dumping pollutes our rivers, our lakes, our seas, and the only thing on the up is debt at £60 billion. The Conservative Party cycle of privatising profit, usually for multi-billion-pound foreign sovereign wealth funds, and then nationalising risk, just isn't sustainable, nor is it a fair deal for working people. Now, the news that we're seeing is a result of the Conservative Party's failed profit above public interest experiment, handing over the water industry at a knockdown price, together with the entire infrastructure serving the nation, over to private enterprise. Almost unique, for instance, when rail was privatised, the PRACs weren't sold off. But with water, the lot was handed over with little safeguards for our national interest, our national security or bill payers. So can I ask the Minister, when was her department first made aware of the financial situation at Thames Water? Has her department had any reason to believe that those responsible at Thames Water wouldn't be able to meet their licence obligations or legal obligations? If this means a taxpayer-funded bailout, how much will that cost and how will it be paid for? And what assessment has she made on the liability of UK pension funds who are invested in Thames and other water companies considered at risk? And given where we are, does she confirm today her confidence for the financial regulator? And finally, given what we see with Thames Water today, does she have any concerns about any other water companies, or does she consider this to be an isolated case? Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just first of all, in our DEFRA department, we have our individual portfolios. I am the Water Minister, and the Secretary of State has full confidence in her Minister in sending them to the dispatch box. I just want to make the point too, in terms of the debt issue that was raised there by the Shadow Minister. Just for information, debt to equity fell last year by 4% in the water industry, actually making it more resilient, Mr. Speaker. And, just to put it on the record, since privatisation, capital investment in the water industry has been 84% higher than it was pre-privatisation. So I think we need to get that out there on the table. And in terms of the water company mentioned today, Thames Water, it's not for me to comment on the individual financial position of a water company. We have an independent regulator who is doing that. That is what the regulator Ofwat is indeed for. Water companies are commercial entities, and it is for the company and its investors to resolve any possible issues. And government, of course, is confident that Ofwat, as the economic regulator of the water industry, is working closely with any company that would be facing financial stress.
Chair of the Select Committee, Sir Robert Dudley.
Thank you. Sewage treatment plants are all too often overwhelmed at times of heavy rain. So as well as installing stormwater tanks like the new 4 million litre stormwater tank in Scarborough, does the Minister agree we should do more to encourage homeowners to harvest grey water, which can buffer the effects of heavy rain, and also use that water for things like flushing their toilets?
I thank him for broadening the scope of the debate. Indeed, we are in discussions with the DULUC department, because a lot of these issues don't just come under DEFRA. We have to work with other departments on this very issue of grey water harvesting and better using the rain that does fall. I've just visited a farmer in Devon, and he was collecting all the water from the roofs of his farm building, which supplied his entire farm with all the water for the animals. So I thank him for his point.
Let us go to Sir Stephen Timms.
Mr. Speaker, in assessing, as she's explained, the resilience of the water industry, what assessment is she making of the impact on UK pension funds if a major company like Thames Water does, as is being widely suggested in the press, if that company fails?
Minister.
I thank him for that. But there is a structure, there is a process for working through this. It's up for the individual water companies and the regulator to work with them to ensure that they are resilient. That is why Ofwat reports annually on how resilient each water company is. And if it flags any issues at all, then Ofwat works very, very closely with that industry, because we need our water companies to be fully functioning. We need to attract the investment, as we have done since privatisation. That huge sum of money that has been invested since privatisation that I just mentioned earlier on, we need that money to be there to invest in the infrastructure, to give our customers the kind of service that they deserve, and also to be mindful that it's just not all piled onto customers. We have to share the load.
A bit more.
Speaker, I think it's worth making the House realise that actually it was the opposition party that voted against the Environment Act, which actually gave Ofwat more powers. So can my right honourable friend assure me that the water regulator Ofwat will be able to clamp down on excessive cash payouts and ensure that water companies put their customers first?
I thank him for pointing that out. It's absolutely right. It doesn't matter what the opposition say today. They didn't vote for all the measures in the Environment Act. And one of those measures was, and I thank him for raising this, that Ofwat will be able to hold water companies to account where they don't demonstrate a link between dividends and performance. They've got to have a sound performance and be performing for their customers. Otherwise, they can't pay out their dividends.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm afraid we're hearing staggering complacency from the Minister on this, and this will come as no comfort to my constituents who were flooded out 3 years ago in the West London floods, which were the second 100-year event in less than a decade. If Ofwat had been doing such a good job as she is now apparently telling us, in holding the government to account, why are we in this situation? What exactly have Ofwat been doing?
I think it has to be remembered that indeed privatisation occurred in 1989, so we've had a succession of different governments during that time, and it's been this government that has really accelerated clamping down on water companies and opening up transparency. So she asks what Ofwat have done, and I'll just name a few things. Since 2020, Ofwat updated the licences so that if a water company loses its investment credit rating, it's barred from making payouts to shareholders. Then in July 2022, it set out additional proposals to increase financial resilience, including companies to have a stronger credit rating. And then it's just in March announced that it would take enforcement actions against water companies that do not link dividend payments to performance. So I would say this government has done more than any ever before to make sure we have a fully functioning, very strong regulator.
Philip Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Minister, on the subject of financial resilience, has taken the opportunity to consider the hodgepodge of policies coming from the front bench opposite on this subject. Under their prescription, they would seek to take all of the profit of the water companies to invest in capital expenditure. That would undermine the financial resilience of those companies that rely on private capital to invest in order to achieve this problem. And in the one part of the country where they do have responsibility, Wales, has she noticed that the sewerage overflows in Wales are almost double the rate per overflow pipe they are in England?
I thank him for pointing that out, and I couldn't support more strongly what he says. This is a private system. We have Ofwat saying it is financially resilient. We do actually need investment in these companies to make them function properly. Obviously, we need to hold those companies to account, but we need to see that enormous investment that we on this side have a fully costed plan for everything in our plan for water, for our storm sewage overflow reduction plan. And we are not pulling the wool over people's eyes, Mr. Speaker. We are telling them clearly what this will mean, but how it will deliver the water services that we need.
John Cryer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thames Water, which is on the verge of going under, provides a quarter of the entire population with its water supply. When was she told about the financial plight of Thames, and what's the plan if the worst comes to the worst and it does go under?
Minister.
Yes, I thank him for that. And you're right, Thames Water does supply an enormous amount of our population. And obviously, Ofwat has been working closely with Thames Water, as it does all water companies. And government then works with Ofwat. We give Ofwat our strategic policy statement on what are their priorities. Overall, the water companies are considered resilient, but there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes with Thames Water to ensure that customers will not be impacted, and there is a process in place, if necessary, to move us to the next stage.
Sir Robert Battle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Swindon residents will be very concerned about the future of Thames Water. I would ask my honourable friend to keep me and colleagues updated, please, with regard to any issues relating to that. Underlying this, Labour's model is clearly never going to work. We've got to understand that only the private sector will be able to invest, and the party opposite might bleat now, but they didn't do anything about it when they were in government. The point is this, isn't it? Where you have an effective monopoly, a private monopoly, the regulator has to be as effective as possible. Will she do everything she can to ensure that Ofwat is actually working in a way that's in the full interests of customers, because there are aspects of its operation that do not seem to me to pass that test?
I thank him for that, and I'd like to give assurances, obviously, for his constituents in Swindon. He's right to raise that. It is a big water company. It does deliver on a very wide scale. But Ofwat is working very, very closely with Thames Water on their plans. Plans will be looked over, submitted, accounts submitted in due course, and Ofwat will work with the company so that we do have a resilient pathway, and customers should rest assured that their supplies will be protected, both water and wastewater.
Clive Efford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The situation is that this privatised industry knows that at the end of the day, the banker of last resort is the British taxpayer. Yeah. And that's exactly where we are now with Thames Water. They've been taking profits for the last 35 years and not investing for the future. Regardless of what went on before, it's about investing for the needs that are coming forwards in front of the industry. And they have failed to plan ahead. And they've taken money whilst not doing the job that they were expected to do in charge of such an essential public service. So what is the government going to do to protect consumers and make sure that we plan ahead for this industry?
Well, Ofwat, of course, is the independent regulator, and government directs them through its strategic policy statement, as the honourable member will know. And it's Ofwat's job to ensure that in the price review, when the water companies submit their plans, and they're going over the draft plans right now, that within those plans they can demonstrate that they will deliver the things that government, for example, is setting through all the targets on the storm overflows, on the leakage, on the demand reduction. And it's for Ofwat to ensure the company will be resilient in delivering that infrastructure. There's a firm structure in place, and Ofwat is constantly also monitoring companies' gearing, its debt-to-equity levels, and we are confident as a government that Ofwat is taking reasonable measures to challenge companies to reduce those gearing levels where appropriate.
Richard Fuller.
Mr. Speaker, about a quarter of the economic output of this country is in sectors that are under regulators, including the water industry. And we've seen both with Ofwat, but also in other sectors with Ofgem, Financial Conduct Authority, where regulators aren't performing to the standards that the public would expect them, or indeed the industry would expect them. And if we're honest, Mr. Speaker, in this House and in Parliament, we do not have the toolkit to assess the performance of regulators on a systemic basis year on, year out. So will my honourable friend work with other ministerial colleagues to see if we can improve the regular oversight of regulators like Ofwat so that we can take a more rounded view of issues such as today, rather than have it come to an urgent question that's brought by the opposition?
I thank him for that, and of course it is absolutely essential that we have fully functioning regulators. He's absolutely right about that. But I would say, in terms of Ofwat, they have done an enormous amount since this government has been in power to streamline what they do, to improve transparency, to change these licences, to make those changes so that dividends aren't paid if there's any environmental damage being caused. And government, with its strategic policy statement, has directed that. And our targets, indeed, will ensure that the regulator has to enable the water companies to put the right measures in place. But he is right, one should never be complacent. And if there are things that do need to be improved through the regulators, then of course those things should happen. But I'm making a big effort.
Mr. Speaker, many of my constituents in Feltham and Heston are hugely worried about reports of Thames Water being on the brink and what this could mean for their bills. Thames Water has been appallingly managed. Leaks haven't been dealt with, sewage continually dumped, with the former CEO Sarah Bentley needing to be asked to forego her bonus, all the while the government missing in action. So why is the government, yet again, running to catch up, with nothing in the Minister's statement today giving confidence they have a grip, and with our constituents paying the price?
Where water companies underperform and don't meet their targets, there's a process in place where actually they have to basically credit the money back to the customers. And £143 million was credited back in this respect last year. So we do have the tools. The regulator does have the tools to do that. The regulator has tightened up so many of its measures, and all of these will be impacting on all of the water companies.
Robert Court.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that the Minister won't be able to comment on Thames Water's finances in detail, but can she reassure my constituents who will be really worried that whatever happens there, their day-to-day services will be protected and the much-needed upgrades that we need will still be delivered?
Yes, I thank him for that, and he's absolutely right. Of course, customers come first, and I would like to give assurances that the customers of Thames Water will be assured their water supplies and their wastewater services. And if he wants to meet to discuss this, I'm very happy to do that with him.
Manira Wilson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Residents in Twickenham, Teddington and the Hamptons will of course be extremely worried to hear Thames Water is on the brink of collapse, but they're also frankly fed up to the back teeth with this company that not only pumps sewage into our precious River Thames, but also we've seen sewage flooding our streets in recent times of flooding from rainfall. but also now plans to pump treated sewage into the Thames at times of drought. This is indicative of underinvestment by the company in fixing leaks and being stripped to the bare bones whilst lining the pockets of executives. All the while, the government has been missing in action and the regulator has failed. So will the Minister back proposals by the Liberal Democrats to reform water companies into public good companies, transforming their boards and their priorities in the interest of the environment and consumers?
I will just highlight the Thames Super Sewer, which is almost ready to open in a not too distant future, which is a tremendous project for the people of London, including many of her constituents. And I would also say that we have a system of privatisation. I've already reported that, in fact, its financial resilience has increased over the last year rather than decreasing. We have a system whereby they invest money, they attract really important money in from investors so that we can get what we need. We have costed plans for all this. The Liberal Democrats have no costed plans for what they suggest they might do with the water companies, or indeed where the money is going to come from.
Duncan Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's probably worth pointing out to the parties opposite that actually 93% of all of our UK coastal bathing waters meet good or excellent conditions. Yeah. Now, actually, in North Norfolk, we have lost 3 blue flag beaches, which went from excellent to good. But guess what? There is not a single reason why they lost that flag, and under the Environment Agency's marking, it looks like it's not down to combined sewage overflows, but entirely natural phenomena. So could the Minister help me, A, get my blue flags back, and secondly, hold the Environment Agency to task so we have a proper testing regime that transparently shows that we have excellent bathing water quality all over North Norfolk?
Well done, Duncan.
I thank him very much for raising the issue of the bathing water quality, because since privatisation, of course, we do have almost or virtually the best quality water coming out of our taps almost anywhere in the world, but we also have these phenomenal results for our bathing water areas, 93% being classed as good or excellent. I know that he has concerns about his own areas. I hope they will soon be back up to blue flag status. The Environment Agency works very, very closely if there are individual cases where concerns have been highlighted, and I'm happy to put him in touch with them or just to work with him to find out what those individual cases were so that we can get them back up to that fantastic standard that they deserve.
And this lot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Today, not for the first time, most of my constituents have little or no water supply. 2 years ago, not for the first time, hundreds of my constituents had their homes flooded with raw sewage. Year after year, Thames Water has failed its customers while obscenely rewarding its management and shareholders. No one will miss the asset strippers at Thames Water if they go under. All we want is working infrastructure and good customer service at a reasonable cost. Is that too much to ask?
Obviously it is.
Of course, that is what we want for all of our customers, and that is why we've indeed launched our plan for water to ensure that we deal with any pollution incidents, we deal with water supply issues, and we deal with the future of the water industry, pulling everything together. And that is why we've set all our targets and why we produced our storm sewage overflow plan, and why the water companies are going to have to spend £56 billion of capital investment by 2050 to address this. Every water company, including Thames, has got to do an action plan for each of their storm sewage overflows, and that is what Thames Water will do.
Dame Ansley.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. When they were privatised, water companies had all the debt written off, so they started with zero. Since then, they've borrowed £53 billion, and much of this has been used to help pay £72 billion in dividends. The investment has been made by borrowing and put onto customers' bills. And now S&P, the rating agency, has negative outlooks for 2/3 of the UK water companies it rates because they're over-leveraged and they've taken out too much debt in an era of low interest rates, which they're now having to pay. This is not a triumph. It's actually a huge problem for the resilience of our water industry. And what is the Minister going to do when water companies start falling over?
Just for information, Thames Water itself hasn't paid any dividends for the last 6 years. And Ofwat, quite rightly, will hold companies to account where they don't clearly demonstrate the link between dividends and performance, and we made that possible, obviously, through the landmark Environment Act.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to bring the Minister back to the figures that we've just heard, that water companies had no debt when they were privatised, since when they have borrowed £53 billion, and much of that has been used to help pay the £72 billion in dividends. Meanwhile, we have this appalling sewage scandal, particularly in the southeast of England. We have a failing water company, the Southern Water Company, that my constituents have no choice but to rely on, and it's considering raising bills by £279 per year by 2030, largely to pay for the investment that they should have been making in the previous years. Doesn't that just show that privatisation of water was a serious mistake and it needs to be permanently rectified?
What I would say is that privatisation has enabled clean and plentiful water to come out of our taps. And it's actually unlocked £190 billion of funding to invest in the industry. That's the equivalent of £5 billion annually. That's double what we had pre-privatisation. I'm not saying that there is not a lot of scope where improvements can still be made, and I've stood at this dispatch box many times, as has the Secretary of State, to say some of the actions of water companies are completely unacceptable, and that's why we've introduced all our targets, why we've introduced the storm overflow plan, and why we've introduced our plan for water.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As has already been said by 2 previous speakers, the issue of funding and loans to the water company has been huge, and that's where they've been paying their dividends from. The issue of shareholders is that we have foreign investors taking huge amounts of money away from this country, and also in terms of pension funds, what we need is better fund managers who are able to assess where they're putting their money, and they should be held accountable too as well. Ofwat has not been doing what it's supposed to do. The current Chief Executive, I believe, of Ofwat is going to be applying for the job of Thames Water, and that shows where the companies are looking at to do and how Ofwat works and how closely it works. Rather than scrutinising them, is looking for the next job, and that's what we have to stop. We need to stop my constituents paying more for water and to be allowed to have decent water in their decent homes and in the environments around them, and that's what we want the government to do. This is a Tory policy that has failed over years.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Not sure what the question was there, Mr. Speaker. We want the same things. We want good value for customers. We want clean and plentiful water. We want to hold the water companies to account. We want them to invest the money that we need to deliver these services. And that's why we've got a plan for water. That's why we've got targets. That's why we brought through the measures in the Environment Act. And that's why Ofwat, the regulator, has taken all of the actions that I've previously named to increase transparency on the water companies and to ensure that money is not being paid out if there's any environmental impact or performance negativity in their company.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. In the last year, a number of my constituents on the Westfield estate have had their homes and their gardens flooded by raw sewage. Yorkshire Water accept it's their sewage, but they don't accept it's their responsibility to help with the clean-up. Will the Minister look at the legal position to ensure that water companies are held accountable in this case? And in the meantime, we should put pressure on Yorkshire Water and others to pay for the clean-up that my constituents are now having to fund themselves.
Of course, you'll know we have put huge pressure on the water companies because they've now got to invest £56 billion in infrastructure to deal with sewage issues. If he does want to meet with you separately just to talk about that one issue, I'm happy to do it.
Dan Jarvis.
Back in January, I asked the Water Minister if she thought the current system of regulation was fit for purpose, and she said yes. So can I ask her again today, does she still think the system of water regulation is fit for purpose?
Yes.
Rebecca Longberry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Water companies were sold with no debt and they were privatised in 1989. In fact, they were given a green dowry by the government of £1.5 billion. However, since then, these companies have taken on borrowings of £60.6 billion, diverting income from customer bills to pay dividends and interest payments. And as a result, water bills have increased by upwards of 40% in real terms.
Does the Minister honestly think that consumers hail privatisation as a success?
Well, actually, ultimately, it is customers that pay for investment in the industry, but they pay this over a very long period of time, as she will know. And if a company didn't pay out dividends, it would struggle to get access to the finance to fund future investment, and it would limit the level of investment and impact on future customers. So that's why customers, they have to pay upfront for a lot of this investment. They need to secure large amounts of funding to pay for this, and to avoid customer bills increasing drastically to pay for this, companies have to secure the money by raising debt or equity. She knows how it works. The regulator just has to ensure that system is fully functioning and that the water companies are resilient, but also we have all the resilient water supplies we require.
It's been reported that the water companies are drawing up their business plans for 2025 to 2030, and on average they're going to be looking at a 25% increase in bills. Given what we've heard today, wouldn't bill payers in my constituency just think that having to pay extra to water companies, they might as well just be flushing their money down the drain for all the good that it will do in terms of improved water quality, improved services and investment in infrastructure?
Yeah, those plans are all being assessed right now. The draft plans are going into Ofwat. They're analysed with a very fine tooth comb, and all of the things that I've mentioned today will be obviously scrutinised so that we can deliver the infrastructure that is needed. We have the clean and plentiful water supplies we require, and the clean environment and healthy environment, and that there isn't an undue impact on customer bills. All of those things have to be taken into account to deliver the water supplies that I believe the people we go out and meet and the people we serve in our jobs deserve.
Mick Whitley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The British public should not be asked to cover the costs of failures of the water monopolies and its shareholders, which have borrowed extensively to pay dividends while failing to make the necessary investments in infrastructure and resilience. Does the Minister agree with me that if the government is compelled to take water Does the Minister agree with me that if the government is compelled to take Thames Water into public ownership, then it should stay in public hands?
Minister.
Well, I'm not aware of the situation he's referring to there. Ofwat's working very, very closely with Thames Water to ensure that there is a viable business there, to ensure that customers are not impacted, and to ensure that the water supply services and the wastewater services are still delivered. And Ofwat have strengthened, as I have mentioned, so many measures so that we have a much more resilient industry in future, and indeed that changing and lowering of the debt to equity level demonstrates that we do have a more resilient industry.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've seen bonuses and dividends put ahead of investment in infrastructure or maintaining sufficient reserves. In our own area, the Devon and Somerset, covered by South West Water, that company has paid out £112 million in dividends this year, despite having just £144 million in reserves, £2.5 billion less in reserves than 2 years ago. This week we've had one water firm CEO resign, but no Conservative minister has ever taken responsibility. When will a Conservative minister finally take responsibility and get a grip, or step aside?
As he knows, Ofwat have announced new measures to enable it to take enforcement action against water companies that don't link dividend payments to performance. I mean, that's just not happening. I think he needs to look at some of the stats he's just quoted, because I think that they might relate to the wider Pennon Group. And I've just been down there to visit South West Water to have a really forensic look at their systems and how they deliver water. And that is what we do with our water companies. That is actually Ofwat's role and Ofwat's job, to hold water companies into account. And they've actually just taken measures in place through Treasury so that they've got another £11.3 million to tackle enforcement.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for her answers to the questions? Ever mindful that house building is important, development opportunities are critical for the future as well. So with developers being charged more and more to connect to the network and then faced with delays for those very connections, what plans has the Minister to introduce affordability to the sector sector connection system for any new developments?
Okay, thank you very much for that. Of course, he raises an important issue, and we always have to be mindful of costs, not just to customers through their bills, but also developers building houses. We're actually working very closely with the DULUC department on a whole range of measures and on their planning guidance as well, so that we are able to tackle a whole range of issues connected with water, including things like the rainwater harvesting, which we can work along with developments with, and SUDs as well, which will really help the whole of our water infrastructure.
What's the point of order, Mr. Speaker?
Is it actually on this? John Cryer, point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the Minister may have inadvertently misled the House, because she said clearly that Thames Water have not been paying out dividends. The reality is Thames Water have not been paying out dividends in the usual way, but they did pay a dividend last year to the parent company, so they have been paying out dividends.
Minister, I don't know whether you'd like to respond, please.
I'll thank him to that. Certainly, I would just check out the wordings. I would hate to mislead the House, Mr. Speaker. And if there's something I've said that was inadvertently incorrect, I'm happy to put that straight on the record.
Right. Sorry. I'll just let those clear before we come to the statement. We now come to the statement. I call the Secretary of State, Stephen Bartley.